The psychology of obedience. A manager asks you to stay late to finish a report. You had plans, you were looking forward to them, but you say yes immediately. You do not pause. You do not mention your plans. You do not ask if it can wait until morning. Later, a friend asks you to help them move this weekend. You hesitate. You check your calendar. You say maybe. You ask what time. You suggest Sunday instead of Saturday. You offer to help for a few hours, not the whole day. The difference is not about how much you care. It is not about how busy you are. It is about who is asking. With the manager, you did not feel like you had a choice. With the friend, you did. That feeling changed everything about how you responded. This is obedience. Not the dramatic kind. Not soldiers following orders or subjects bowing to kings. The everyday kind. The kind that shapes how you write emails, how you answer questions, how you move through rooms, how you decide what to say and what to keep to yourself. What obedience actually is. Obedience is doing what someone tells you to do because of who they are, not because you agree with them or because the request makes sense. It is following instructions because the person giving them has authority. Authority means they have the right to tell you what to do. That right can come from their job title, their role, their age, their status, or simply from the fact that everyone treats them like they have it. You obey when you comply without questioning, when you do not push back, when you say yes before you have fully decided, when you act as if their preference is a command. Obedience is not the same as agreement. You can obey someone you disagree with. You can obey someone you do not respect. You can obey someone who is wrong. It is also not the same as cooperation. Cooperation is mutual. Obedience is one-sided. In cooperation, both people have a say. In obedience, one person directs and the other follows. The key is this: obedience happens when you treat someone's words as if they carry weight that your own do not. How obedience forms in ordinary situations. Obedience does not start with a command. It starts with a difference. One person controls something the other person needs: a paycheck, a grade, access to a space, approval, information, safety, the ability to make life easier or harder. That difference creates a tilt. The person who controls the resource is now in a position to make requests. The person who needs the resource is now in a position to comply. At work, your boss controls your schedule, your assignments, and your performance review. When they ask you to do something, you do not treat it like a suggestion. You treat it like an instruction. Even if they say please, even if they smile. At school, a teacher controls your grade. When they tell you to rewrite an essay, you do not argue about whether it needs rewriting. You rewrite it. You might disagree privately, but you comply. At home, a parent controls when you eat, where you go, what you are allowed to do. When they tell you to clean your room, you do not negotiate as an equal. You are a child. They are the adult. That difference is the entire structure. The tilt does not require cruelty. It does not require shouting. It just requires that one person can say no and the other person cannot. Once that tilt exists, obedience becomes automatic. You stop weighing each request. You stop deciding whether to comply. You just do. How it changes communication. Obedience changes the way people talk. It changes what they say, how they say it, and how long they wait before responding. When you are speaking to someone you obey, you choose your words carefully. You do not interrupt. You wait for them to finish. You do not contradict them directly. If you disagree, you soften it. You say things like, "I see what you mean," or "That makes sense," before you offer another view. You also respond faster. When your boss sends you an email, you reply within the hour. When a friend sends you an email, you reply when you get around to it. The speed is not about how much you care. It is about who has authority. When you are the one with authority, you do not have to choose your words as carefully. You can be blunt. You can say, "Do this," instead of, "Could you do this?" You can leave out the explanation. You can assume compliance. You also wait longer. You do not feel pressure to respond immediately. You reply when it is convenient. Your delay does not feel rude. It feels normal, because you are not the one who needs something. This creates a pattern. The person with less authority works harder in the conversation. They explain more, they justify more, they apologize more, they thank more. The person with more authority works less. They ask and expect. They do not thank as much. They do not explain unless they choose to. A teacher emails a student, "See me after class." The student does not write back why. They show up. A student emails a teacher, "Can I turn in my paper a day late?" They do not just ask, they explain, they apologize, they offer a reason, they wait for permission. The difference is not personality, it is position. How silence and timing reveal the dynamic. Obedience shows up in silence. When someone with authority speaks, the room gets quiet. People stop talking. They turn toward the person. They wait. When someone without authority speaks, the room does not always stop. People keep side conversations going. They check their phones. They nod without really listening. The silence is respect. But respect in this context means deference. It means treating one person's voice as more important than others. Obedience also shows up in timing. When a boss asks a question in a meeting, people answer right away. When a junior employee asks a question, there's a pause. People look around to see if someone else will answer. The silence lasts longer. The question might go unanswered entirely. The junior employee notices. They stop asking as many questions. They learn that their questions slow things down. They learn to wait until after the meeting. They learn to ask privately. This is how obedience teaches people to shrink their presence. Not because anyone told them to, because the pattern of response showed them where they stand. How people behave differently. Once the dynamic exists, once obedience is established, people split into two modes. The mode they use with authority and the mode they use with peers. With authority, they are careful. They prepare before they speak. They rehearse difficult conversations. They check their tone. They worry about how they will be perceived. With peers, they are loose. They speak as they think. They interrupt. They joke. They do not worry as much about being misunderstood. A person who is quiet in meetings can be loud at happy hour. A person who never pushes back on their manager can argue passionately with their spouse. The difference is not confidence, it is context. Obedience also changes how people interpret instructions. When someone with authority makes a suggestion, it is heard as a directive. When they ask a question, it is heard as a request for action. A manager says, "I wonder if we should try a different approach." The team hears, "Change the approach." A peer says the same thing. The team hears, "Maybe, let's discuss." The words are identical. The meaning is not. This creates confusion. The person with authority might think they are being collaborative. They think they are inviting input. But the people listening do not hear an invitation. They hear an instruction. So they comply without discussing. Later, the manager is frustrated. They wanted a conversation. They got silent agreement. But the team was doing what they have learned to do. They were obeying. How obedience becomes invisible. Obedience becomes invisible when it is constant. When you obey someone every day, it stops feeling like obedience. It starts feeling like normal behavior, like respect, like professionalism, like how things are supposed to work. You stop noticing that you are complying. You stop noticing that you do not push back. You stop noticing that your preferences disappear in the conversation. A woman works for the same boss for 3 years. Every time he asks her to take on a new project, she says yes. Every time he suggests a change, she makes it. Every time he sets a deadline, she meets it. She does not think of herself as obedient. She thinks of herself as responsible, as a team player, as someone who gets things done. But when she switches jobs and her new boss asks her opinion, she struggles to give it. She waits to be told what to do. She does not trust her own judgment. She has spent 3 years learning that her job is to execute, not to decide. This is what obedience does over time. It trains you to defer. It becomes a habit. You stop noticing you are doing it. The same thing happens to the person with authority. They stop noticing that people always agree with them. They stop noticing that no one challenges their ideas. They start to believe that their ideas are just better, that people agree because they are right, not because they are the boss. This is how obedience creates blind spots on both sides. How people can misread obedience as personality. People often mistake obedience for personality traits. A quiet employee is called shy. A compliant employee is called agreeable. An employee who does not speak up in meetings is called passive. But the behavior is not about personality. It is about position. The same employee who is quiet in front of their boss can be assertive with their direct reports. The same employee who never disagrees with senior leadership can argue fiercely with their peers. The difference is authority. When authority is present, they obey. When it is absent, they do not. But the quiet behavior is what gets noticed. So the employee gets labeled. Shy, passive, not leadership material. This label sticks. It affects how they are treated. It affects what opportunities they are given. It becomes part of their reputation. The employee might even start to believe it. They might think they are just not assertive. They might think they are bad at speaking up. They do not realize they only struggle to speak up in one specific context. The context where they are expected to obey. The same misreading happens in reverse. A person who is used to being obeyed can seem confident, assertive, decisive. But their confidence is not just internal, it is also structural. They are confident because people listen when they speak, because their ideas are not questioned, because they do not have to fight to be heard. If you put that same person in a room where they do not have authority, they might struggle. They might seem less confident, less assertive, because the structure that supported their confidence is gone. But people do not see it that way. They see confidence as a personality trait. They do not see it as a response to being obeyed. How obedience grows through repetition. Obedience is not static. It grows. Every time you comply without question, you make it easier to comply the next time. Every time you say yes immediately, you train the other person to expect immediate yes. A manager asks you to work late once. You say yes, no problem. The next week they ask again. You hesitate for a moment, but you say yes. The third time they do not ask. They just tell you, "We will need you late on Thursday." You do not push back. You have already established that you will say yes. This is how small acts of obedience build into large patterns. The manager is not trying to take advantage of you. They are simply responding to what you have shown them. You have shown them that you are available. So they treat you as available. The same thing happens with timing. If you always respond to emails within an hour, people expect a response within an hour. If you take longer one time, they notice. They follow up. They ask if everything is okay. You have trained them to expect speed. Now, speed is the baseline. If you always agree in meetings, people stop asking for your opinion. They assume you will agree. Your silence is not seen as withholding. It is seen as consent. You have trained them to expect agreement. Now agreement is assumed. Obedience builds on itself. Each act of compliance makes the next act more likely. Each moment of deference makes the next moment easier to predict. How requests become expectations. At first, a request is just a request. You can say no. You can negotiate. You can ask for more information. But once you have said yes enough times, the request stops feeling like a request. It starts feeling like an expectation. A parent asks a teenager to do the dishes after dinner. The teenager does them. The next night, the parent does not ask. They just assume. The dishes are the teenager's job now. The teenager might not have agreed to that. They agreed to do the dishes once, but once became always. This is how obedience turns requests into obligations. The shift is quiet. There is no conversation about it. The expectation just appears. And because the teenager has been complying, it feels awkward to suddenly stop. It feels like backing out of an agreement they never made. The same thing happens at work. A manager asks you to take notes in meetings. You do it once, then twice. By the third meeting, you just start taking notes without being asked. It is your role now. No one assigned it to you. You assigned it to yourself by complying. This is one of the hidden costs of obedience. It turns temporary help into permanent responsibility. How authority expands to fill available space. Authority does not stay within boundaries, it expands. A manager who has authority over your work will start to have authority over your time, then over your tone, then over your appearance, then over your life outside of work. They do not do this consciously. They do it because authority, once established, tends to grow. People with authority start to feel entitled to make more requests, to ask for more, to expect more. A teacher who controls your grade will start to control how you sit, how you speak, when you use the bathroom, whether you can drink water. A parent who controls your safety will start to control your friends, your hobbies, your clothes, your opinions. The expansion happens gradually. Each new request feels small, reasonable, not worth fighting over. But over time, the small requests add up. The person with authority now controls more of your life than they did at the start. And you are less free than you were. This is why obedience is not just about following instructions. It is about how much of yourself you give away in the process. How people justify their compliance. People rarely see themselves as obedient. They see themselves as reasonable, as practical, as doing what makes sense. They tell themselves they are saying yes because the request is fair, because it is part of their job, because it is easier than arguing. But the real reason they are saying yes is because of who is asking. If a peer made the same request, they would say no, or they would negotiate, or they would offer a compromise. But when the request comes from authority, they do not do any of that. They just comply. They do not see this as obedience. They see it as professionalism, as respect, as being a good employee, a good student, a good child. This justification protects them from feeling powerless. It lets them believe they are choosing. But the choice is constrained. They are choosing within a system that punishes refusal. A student agrees to rewrite a paper for the third time. They tell themselves they are doing it to improve their work, to learn, to meet the teacher's standards, but they are also doing it because the teacher controls their grade. If the teacher did not control their grade, they might push back. They might say the paper is good enough. They might refuse. The justification hides the obedience. But the obedience is still there. How obedience appears as politeness. Politeness and obedience often look the same. Both involve softening your language. Both involve deferring to others. Both involve not saying what you really think. But politeness is a choice. Obedience is not. Politeness is something you do to make interactions go smoothly. You can be polite to anyone, your boss, your peer, your friend. You choose when to be polite and when to be direct. Obedience is something you do because you have to. You cannot choose to stop being obedient to your boss without consequences. You cannot choose to be direct with them the way you can with a friend. But because the behaviors look similar, people mistake obedience for politeness. They think they are just being nice, just being respectful, just using good manners. They do not realize they are also submitting. A woman says, "I'm sorry," before she asks a question in a meeting. She thinks she is being polite, but she is also signaling deference. She is treating her question as an interruption, as something that needs an apology. A man does not say, "I'm sorry," before asking the same question. He just asks. The difference is not personality. It is power. The woman has less of it. So her politeness is also obedience. This is why politeness can be a trap. It disguises the power imbalance. It makes submission look like choice. How obedience shapes what you think you want. Obedience does not just change your behavior, it changes your desires. When you obey someone long enough, you start to want what they want. You start to see the world through their priorities. You stop noticing that your own priorities have disappeared. A young employee spends 2 years working for a demanding boss. The boss values long hours, quick responses, and constant availability. The employee adapts. They work late. They check email on weekends. They cancel plans to meet deadlines. At first, this feels like sacrifice. But over time, it starts to feel normal. They start to believe that working this way is what success looks like. They start to feel anxious when they are not working. They start to judge themselves by the same standards their boss uses. They have internalized the obedience. It is no longer something imposed from outside. It is something they impose on themselves. This is one of the most powerful effects of obedience. It does not just control your actions, it colonizes your mind. You start to police yourself. You start to want the things you are supposed to want. A child grows up in a strict household. They learn to be quiet, to follow rules, to not ask for too much. As an adult, they do not suddenly become loud and demanding. They stay quiet. They follow rules. They do not ask for much. They think this is just who they are, but it is who they were taught to be. The obedience is still there. It has just moved inside. How obedience breaks. When consequences disappear. Obedience lasts as long as the authority lasts. When the person with authority loses their power, obedience disappears. Sometimes slowly, sometimes all at once. A student graduates, they no longer have to listen to their teachers. The relief is immediate. They can sleep in. They can skip things. They can decide for themselves. An employee quits. They no longer have to answer to their boss. They stop checking email. They stop justifying their time. They stop saying yes to things they do not want to do. The change is not about the person. It is about the structure. Once the structure is gone, the behavior goes with it. But the end of obedience can also be disorienting. A person who has obeyed for years does not always know what they want when they are finally free to choose. They have spent so long following instructions that they do not trust their own judgment. They do not know what they like. They do not know what matters to them. They might look for a new authority to follow, a new boss, a new partner, a new system. Because obedience is familiar. Freedom is not. This is the paradox. People want to be free, but freedom requires practice. And if you have spent years obeying, you have not had that practice. How obedience creates distance. Obedience creates distance between people. When one person obeys another, they cannot be fully honest. They cannot say what they really think. They cannot show frustration, doubt, or disagreement without risk. This means the relationship is not equal. It is transactional. One person gives orders. The other person follows them. There is no room for true collaboration. No room for mutual respect. The person with authority might think the relationship is fine. They might think the other person is happy, engaged, loyal. But the person obeying is performing. They are showing the version of themselves that is safe to show, the version that does not get punished. They are not showing doubt, or frustration, or the fact that they disagree, because those things are dangerous. This creates a gap. The person with authority does not see the real person. They see the obedient version. And the obedient version is always partial, always incomplete. The person obeying feels this gap too. They feel lonely, misunderstood, like no one really sees them. But they cannot fix it by being more honest, because honesty is risky, so they stay distant. And the gap remains. How small refusals shift the dynamic. Obedience is not permanent. It can be interrupted. The interruption starts small, with a pause, a hesitation, a question. Instead of saying yes immediately, you say, "Let me check my schedule." Instead of agreeing without comment, you say, "Can you say more about why we are doing it this way?" Instead of complying in silence, you name the cost. "I can do that, but it will mean pushing back the other project." These are not refusals. They are just moments of friction. But friction changes the dynamic. It shows the person with authority that compliance is not automatic, that you have limits, that you are paying attention to what is being asked. It also shows you something. It shows you that you can pause, that you can ask, that the world does not end when you do. Most people are afraid to create friction. They think it will be seen as disobedience, as disrespect, as a problem. But small friction is not disobedience. It is boundary setting. It is the beginning of a more honest relationship. The first time you do it, it feels risky. But if the other person is reasonable, they adjust. They explain more. They ask instead of telling. They treat you more like a partner and less like a subordinate. If they do not adjust, you learn something important. You learn that they need obedience, that they are not interested in collaboration, that the relationship is more fragile than it seemed. Either way, the friction gives you information, and information is power. How obedience differs from respect. People often confuse obedience with respect, but they are not the same. Respect is what you feel when you value someone's knowledge, experience, or character. You listen to them because you trust their judgment. You consider their perspective because you think it is worth considering. Obedience is what you do when someone has power over you. You listen to them because you have to. You follow their instructions because refusing has consequences. You can respect someone without obeying them. You can obey someone without respecting them. A teenager obeys a parent they do not respect. They follow the rules because they live in the parent's house, because they depend on the parent for money, for safety, for basic needs. But they do not admire the parent. They do not trust the parent's judgment. They just comply. An employee respects a former boss. They no longer work for that boss. They do not have to listen, but they still ask for advice. They still value the boss's opinion, not because they have to, because they want to. The difference is choice. Respect is freely given. Obedience is extracted. This is why being obeyed does not mean you are respected. It just means you have power. And losing power does not mean you lose respect. It just means people stop pretending. Closing reflection. Obedience is everywhere. In how you answer emails, in how you sit in meetings, in how you phrase requests, in how quickly you say yes. It is in the difference between how you talk to your boss and how you talk to your friend. In the way you prepare before asking a question. In the silence that follows when someone with authority speaks. Most of the time, you do not notice it. It feels like professionalism, like respect, like the way things are. But it is more than that. It is a structure, one that sorts people into those who direct and those who follow, those who ask and those who comply. That structure is not neutral. It shapes what you say, what you think, what you want. It trains you to defer, to soften, to disappear. The structure does not require cruelty. It does not require shouting. It just requires that one person can say no and the other person cannot. Once you see it everywhere. In classrooms, in offices, in families, in every interaction where someone has something the other person needs. You start to notice who hesitates and who does not, who apologizes and who does not, who explains themselves and who simply expects to be understood. You start to notice yourself. The moments when you comply without thinking. The moments when you say yes before you have decided. The moments when you become smaller to make room for someone else. And once you notice, you have a choice. Not always an easy one. Not always a safe one. But a choice. You can pause, you can ask, you can name the cost, you can say no. Not every time, not without consequence, but sometimes, in small ways, in ways that remind you that obedience is not inevitable, that you are not just someone who follows, you are also someone who decides.